An overview of the case's who, what, where, and why is provided here. Who was Charles Manson? The Manson family, also known as the Manson cult, was a group of followers led by Charles Manson, who was a charismatic and manipulative individual. Brought into the world in 1934 to a high school mother, Charles Manson spent his young life and youth bobbing between Midwestern family members and later foundations. In his mid-20s, he was married 2 times and had a child. He had a difficult childhood and was in and out of jail throughout his youth and early adulthood. Authorities thought Manson was so severely institutionalized that when he was released from a California prison in 1967, he asked the warden if he could stay. Manson, on the other hand, moved to Berkeley and then San Francisco, both of which became overrun with young people looking to start a new life. He was an older person in the crowd. He had a small group of followers, almost all of whom were women. In 1968, he moved to Los Angeles with several female followers to start a music career. He had learned to play the guitar while he was in prison. Manson used his ability to tell others what they wanted to hear and the loose social codes of the late 1960s, when runaway hippies mixed freely with Hollywood royalty, as tools of persuasion. Both of these skills led him to form a friendship with Dennis Wilson, the Beach Boys drummer. After the family members behind the August 1969 murders were apprehended, Manson was put on trial for murder along with them. He didn't do any of the actual killing, but prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi argued that the family did everything Manson ordered them to do, including murder. One of California's longest-standing prison inmates, Manson died in November 2017. Who were the followers who were referred to as the Manson family? The Manson girls, as they became known, loomed almost as large as Manson himself in the public's imagination. In the late 1960s, members of the Manson family, mostly young women in their late teens and early 20s, were not particularly uncommon. Inspiring themselves to turn on, tune in, and drop out, other hippies, white middle-class women from all over the country were traveling to cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. Some of Manson's female followers were the ones who first met Dennis Wilson and brought Manson to his house, and he used them to get other men to join the group and support it. Spahn Ranch, an old film and television set in the western San Fernando Valley, was Manson and the family's final stop in Los Angeles. Manson had complete control over the group at Spahn. Members were said to be forbidden from carrying money or eyeglasses, and a member of the family, Diane Lake, a follower of Manson who was just 14 when she first met him, wrote about long nights of lectures in her book My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult, and the Darkness That Ended the 60s. During these lectures, Manson instructed others at the ranch to take LSD and listen to him preach about the past, present, and future of humanity. One of Manson's earliest followers, Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm, attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford in 1975, but her gun jammed and she was quickly killed by the Secret Service. However, some members of the family continued to support Manson even after he was sentenced to death, which was later changed to life in prison when the state of California overturned the use of the death penalty. What role did Manson play in Hollywood? In Los Angeles, Manson was connected to numerous influential and wealthy individuals. He met record producer Terry Melcher, the son of actress Doris Day and boyfriend of model and actress Candice Bergen, through Dennis Wilson. The actress's daughter was a family hanger-on at one point. Even though she wasn't an official member, she used her mother's credit cards to buy food and clothes for the family. Manson had courted Melcher as a patron and even hosted the producer at Spahn Ranch, where Melcher politely listened to Manson and the family perform. And Ginn proposes that the house, 10050 Cielo Drive, represented Manson's rejection by the musical establishment. Melcher and Bergen lived in the house, which Tate would eventually rent with her husband, director Roman Polanski. Although Wilson did convince the Beach Boys to rework and record a version of Manson's song, Cease to Exist, which they renamed Never Learn Not to Love, which was considered a flop, Manson became increasingly focused on violence once it became clear that his connections with Wilson and Melcher were not going to significantly advance his music career. How did helter-skelter work? In his exhaustive search for a cause for the murders of the family, prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi concluded that Manson was obsessed with what he referred to as helter-skelter. Helter-skelter, in Manson's language, represented the impending race war that would see thousands of people die and force the family to disappear into underground caves. It was taken from the Beatles song of the same name. Manson told his followers that the White Album was further evidence that his theories about the end of the world were correct. They would remain there until it was time for them to emerge and rule the world that remained. Although Manson initially predicted that the first crimes would be committed by African Americans against white people, the desperate state of his affairs in the summer of 1969, his musical ambitions had largely failed and his Hollywood connections had vanished, prompted him to shift his focus and inform the family that they might have to start helter-skelter themselves, committing heinous crimes in posh neighborhoods in an effort to demonstrate to African Americans how violence should be carried out. Bugliosi published Helter Skelter in 1974. The best-selling true crime book ever written is The True Story of the Manson Murders, which was the first major investigation into the Manson family. Who were the victims of the Manson family? Manson family members Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian drove to Tate and Polanski's house on August 8, 1969, when the director was out of town working on a film. Linda Kasabian would later testify as a witness for the state against the others. Tate, who starred in 1967's Valley of the Dolls and was regarded as one of Hollywood's most promising up-and-comers, was 8 months pregnant and enjoying herself at home with her friends. Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist, Abigail Folger, a coffee heiress, and Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger's boyfriend. Except for the fact that they were physically present in the house that was previously occupied by someone Manson knew, Terry Melcher, none of them had any real connection to Manson or the family. Bugliosi writes in Helter Skelter that a witness for the prosecution said that in March 1969, Manson went to the house to look for Melcher and found Tate on the porch. There could be no question that Charles Manson saw Sharon Tate, and she him, Bugliosi writes. Tate, her friends, and Stephen Parent, a teen friend of the house's caretaker who happened to be pulling out of the driveway when the killers arrived, were all killed by Watson, Krenwinkel, and Atkins. The exceptionally one night from now, similar gathering of relatives, in addition to Leslie Van Houten and Manson himself, set off on a mission to carry out additional homicides. They took a car to Leno LaBianca and Rosemary, a grocery store executive, in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Some members of the Manson family had reportedly attended a party in the neighborhood, but LaBianca was completely unknown to them. Bugliosi claims that the LaBiancas were selected at random after spending several hours driving through posh Los Angeles neighborhoods. Why does Manson continue to loom large? Some of the deepest fears of the American psyche were touched upon by the brutality of the Manson family's murders, as well as the fact that some of the victims were celebrities. These fears included the idea that you might not be safe at home and that even good girls could commit unspeakable crime. In addition, they established the widespread perception in popular culture that the 1960s free love movement was in fact not free. Creepy Crawling by Jeffrey Melnick delves deeper into this feeling. Melnick, a professor of American Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, examines the Manson family's long-term cultural impact in Charles Manson and the many lives of America's most infamous family. In The White Collection, an exposition showing up in her eponymous assortment named after the Beatles collection, Joan Didion utilizes the killings to contend that the 60s had really finished. The distrustfulness, she composed, was satisfied. It was during this time that he became involved in the counterculture movement that was sweeping the United States. Manson's teachings were a strange mix of New Age philosophy, conspiracy theories, and racist beliefs. He believed that he was a messianic figure who had been sent to save the world, and he convinced his followers that they were part of a chosen group who would survive a coming apocalypse. Manson had a vision of a race war, which he called Helter Skelter, named after a song by the Beatles. He believed that African Americans would rise up against white people, and that his followers would emerge as the dominant group after the conflict. He convinced his followers to commit a series of murders in 1969, which he believed would start the race war. The most infamous of these murders was the murder of Sharon Tate, who was a pregnant actress and the wife of director Roman Polanski. Manson instructed his followers to break into her house and kill everyone inside. They brutally murdered Tate and 4 others in a horrific and senseless act of violence. The victims were brutally murdered, and their deaths shocked the nation. The following night, they murdered 2 more people. Manson and several of his followers were arrested and charged with murder. The trial was highly publicized and captivated the nation. Manson and his followers displayed bizarre and erratic behavior during the trial, which only added to the public's fascination with the case. Manson was eventually found guilty of 9 murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent the rest of his life in prison, becoming something of a cult figure in his own right. He died in prison in 2017. Manson's manipulation of vulnerable young women and his willingness to commit acts of violence in the name of his beliefs have made him a symbol of evil and madness. The Manson family's legacy is a cautionary tale about the dangers of charismatic leaders who use their power to exploit and manipulate others. What happened with the family of Manson? A look at important people, decades after horrific crimes. Charles Manson died in 2017 at age 83. Patricia Krenwinkel, imprisoned in Chino. Leslie Van Houten, imprisoned in Corona. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, died in 2015. Prosecutor Aaron Stovitz, died in 2010. Charles Tex Watson, imprisoned and an ordained minister in San Diego County. Susan Atkins, died in prison in 2009. Roman Polanski, living in Europe, wanted in the US and expelled from the Film Academy. Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm, released from prison in 2009. Bruce Davis, imprisoned in San Luis Obispo, Calif. Linda Kasabian, granted immunity for testifying against the Manson family. Robert Beausoleil, imprisoned in California. The Manson family remains one of the most infamous and notorious cults in American history. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative and helpful. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. I love hearing from my viewers and will do my best to respond to everyone. Also, don't forget to check out my other videos on the narrative nexus. I'm sure you'll find something that interests you. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.